few weeks ago when we considered the parable of the prodigal son, I think I told you about my Jewish friend who once told me that any Jew that heard a story that began, "A man had two sons," would say, "Uh-oh." Such stories seldom end well. In addition to the stories we have of brothers in the Old Testament, the story of the prodigal son in the New, there are also rabbinic parables that draw attention to brothers behaving badly. Sibling relationships get off to a rather bad start in Genesis when Cain, angry about the way that his offering was received by God, naturally murders his brother Abel. This rivalry is followed by the one we're going to look at this morning, the rivalry between Jacob and Esau. And then the conflicts between Joseph and his brothers are well known. In fact, they're so angry and frustrated with him that they decide to kill him, but then they decide that it's better to sell him into slavery and make a little money off the deal. Of course, that came back to bite them. Later on, David's son Absalom kills his brother Amnon for an assault on his Absalom's sister Tamar. And we shouldn't neglect the bitter rivalry of the two sisters, Jacob's wives, Leah and Rachel, and so it goes. Now, Jacob and Esau were twins. And when they are born, we are told that Jacob had a hand on Esau's heel, as if he was trying to keep him from being born first and being the firstborn. And they have this rivalry throughout the rest of their life. Esau is a favorite of their old blind father Isaac, while Jacob is the favorite of his mother, Rebekah. Esau is an outdoorsman, a hunter, a woodsman. Now, were Jacob alive today, he'd probably have a cooking show on the Food Channel or something. He was someone who loved to be in the kitchen. As Isaac neared his death, he decides that he's going to bless his eldest son, Esau. And so he tells Esau, "I want you to go out into the fields and catch some game and make that savory stew that I really love. And then after I've had that, I'll give you my blessing." So Esau takes off to go on a hunt. And Jacob and Rebekah start into action. Rebekah shows her chops as a cook by taking two young kids and fixing them in the way that Isaac liked them. And then she dresses her son Jacob in the clothes of Esau, and she puts on his hands the skin of the kid so he will be recognized as his hairier brother. And she has him come in and bring this stew to his old, aging, blind father and tell him, "Here it is, Father, I'm your son Esau, and I've caught game really quickly. And here's the stew that you love." And Isaac is not thoroughly convinced, but he eats the stew anyway, and he blesses Jacob as if he is Esau. And when Esau comes back, he decides that once his father is dead and buried and the period of mourning is over, his brother Jacob is next. And so Jacob wisely takes off. Some decades later, after Jacob has married and had a family, 11 kids, as you hear, he decides to leave his father-in-law Laban, no mean trickster himself, and go home, hoping that in those intervening years, the temper of Esau has lessened, has cooled. But then he hears that Esau is on his way with 400 men, and he's terrified. So he makes preparations. He sends gifts to placate his brother. He moves his family to a place of safety. And then he crosses back over the river, and we are told that he wrestles with a man throughout the night. A man that is more than a man, as we learn as the story goes on. As one Rachel Toome says in her book when she discusses this text, It's one of the most memorable scenes in the book of Genesis, the broader Pentateuch, and arguably the Old Testament as a whole. And she's right. It's a dark text. It's an enigmatic text. It's a story that Rachel will say later we are invited to enjoy, to imagine, and engage with in ways that spark our imaginations, frustrate our assurance of having them entirely figured out, and hopefully keep us coming back to find new and renewed observations. The story is full of mysteries. Now, I think it needs to be read alongside of all the stories of the appearances of God. This last week, preparing for this sermon, I had a conversation with my rabbi friend, and I asked him to talk with me about this story. And he, at one point, laughed, and he said, any story in the Bible where God is encountered is not comfortable. And surely this is an encounter with God. Think about Moses at the burning bush. He sees the bush burning and it's not consumed, and he hears the voice of God and he's terrified. And then Moses and the children of Israel are there at the mountain of God, at Mount Sinai, receiving the 10 Commandments. And after they hear the voice of God, they come to Moses and say, look, Moses, the next time God wants to talk with us, you talk to him and tell us what he has to say. We don't want to hear that again. That's too terrifying. And then there's Elijah up on the same mountain on Sinai, hiding in a cave. And after the earthquake and fire and wind, he hears this still small voice, and he puts his mantle over his head and no doubt trembling goes out to hear the voice of God. Or the prophet Isaiah in Isaiah chapter 6, when he has this vision of God in the temple, he says, "Woe is me, for I am undone." But for sheer wonder and strangeness, it's hard to top this story of Jacob, waiting there before sunrise to encounter his brother and his 400 men. And here he is wrestling with a man that we later find out is either a representative of Israel's God or God's self. And the two of them wrestle all the way till daybreak, when the person that Jacob is wrestling with says, "Let me go before the sun rises." But Jacob won't let him go. He just clings to him. And he says, "I'm not going to let you go until you bless me." And so he tries to get out of God a kind of blessing that he manipulated out of his old father, Isaac. And it works. And God blesses him and gives him a new name, Israel. But because, he said, he contended with both human beings and with God. And Jacob is so convinced that he's actually seen the face of God that he names the place Peniel, which means face of God. So what in the world is going on here? Jacob has been crooked, a deceiver, a schemer, both at home with his brother and on the road with his father-in-law. And he's now, in a sense, being straightened out. One of the things that Rabbi Pupko told me about this story was that the Hebrew word for heel that Jacob had grasped also means crooked. And as I said, some ways the story is about this crooked man Jacob being straightened out. He had clung to God till he received a blessing and a new name that became a new nation. But take note, while he came away with a blessing, he also came away with a limp. His opponent had wounded him, had damaged him, dislocated his hip perhaps. And so Jacob goes into life with a limp, with a wound, but straight, not crooked. What does this mean? Well, as Rachel suggests, we're going to need to use our imaginations. Which of us does not want to be perfect? Which of us does not want to have perfect health, perfect career, a perfect spouse, perfect success, perfect family? Which of us would not rather experience victory than defeat, success than failure, glory than dishonor? 2 Corinthians, Paul is defending his ministry from people who are critiquing him. And he says he's going to have to boast to establish his credentials. Now, boasting is not all that hard for Paul, since, as one of my mentors used to say, he had a rather robust ego. But he doesn't boast just about his successes. He doesn't boast just about his visions and the glories that he's experienced. He boasts in odd ways about his persecutions and his failures. And at the end of this narrative of success and failure, he talks about something that has marred his life, that has caused him so much pain, that he asked God to take it away. And he calls it his thorn in the flesh. But God refused. He said, "My grace is sufficient for you, for power is made perfect in weakness." To imagine that power is enhanced by weakness is, to say the least, counterintuitive in this society. You could argue, in fact, that the whole human race from the very beginning has had time for nothing else than a quest for power over, for dominance, to subject and control the other, whether it's a family member, a friend, a society, a foreign power, or the earth itself. We have a lust for power and a terror of weakness that is insatiable. And we see this in Cain and Abel. Cain's quest for dominance over his brother led to murder. Jacob's quest for dominance over his brother almost led to murder. And Joseph's quest for dominance over his brothers, as we find in that story, he had these visions where they were all going to bow down to him. That's not a way to be a good influence on your brothers. Brought them to almost murder him and sell him into slavery. The abuse of the weak by the powerful throughout history is another clear indication of our passion for power over, our passion for dominance over. Far too many women have been subject to the dominance and abuse of powerful men. Far too many vulnerable people throughout society, throughout history, have been sold into slavery and suffered horrible abuse. Majority cultures have crushed the hopes of minority cultures. And governments throughout history have abused their own laws and their own people simply out of a passion for dominance. And here is God saying, "My power is made perfect in weakness." And Paul saying, "When I am weak, then I am strong." To those in the halls of power of Washington or St. Paul or Moscow or London, this sounds crazy. It sounds crazy because we've been told all of our lives that quite the opposite is true, and this has brought us right to the brink of destruction. Our power to dominate nature has produced global warming that may make our planet unlivable. Our power to control each other, whether in our marriages or family or friendships or businesses or national realities, are fraught and abusive and dangerous. Even our passion for self-control has its danger. The idea that we can control everything about ourselves by ourselves without anybody else's help. Our friends in Alcoholics Anonymous will tell us this is impossible without a community and a higher power. The philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche called this passion for dominance the will to power. And whether we're talking about an individual, a family, a business, a church, or a country, the will to power in the hands of a tyrant, a Hitler or a Stalin, will not only, as the 20th century makes absolutely clear, destroy millions of innocents, but themselves as well. But we are the followers of Jesus. We are the church of Jesus Christ. We are not here to dominate anyone. We are here to dominate, to demonstrate a different way of being in the world. And when the church tries to dominate secular society, when the church tries to dominate the state, you have the worst of both worlds. a powerful entity that becomes demonic. As followers of Jesus, we do not seek dominance. We do not seek to consolidate our power over others. We rather seek an encounter with the Holy One that heals and wounds. And in those wounds, which we all bear, there is grace. In those wounds, the crooked are made straight. In those wounds, we see ourselves for the first time and are made whole by the God who will not let us go. And so we are privileged to come with all of our wounds to the table to meet God, as Jacob did that evening, with fear and trembling. And we come wounded, but we come for healing. In the Old Testament book of Job, Eliphaz was one of Job's friends. And if you know the book, Job's friends were not exactly very helpful. Now he says something profound. He told Job, "Do not despise the discipline of the Almighty, for he wounds, but he binds up. He strikes, but his hands heal." So Jacob limped off to see his brother, ironically, whole for the first time. The crooked was made straight. And so we even lean into our wounds, because there, above all, we are met by God's grace. And we live by the power of that grace, that generosity, that embrace. Refusing to seek dominance, refusing to accept our capacity for cruelty. And in so doing, we as individuals, as a people, show the world what it means to live in peace. Thanks be to God. Amen.